Most people who travel across Asia build a mental hierarchy without realizing it. Singapore sits at the top efficiently, wealthy, the benchmark. Japan earns deep respect. Disciplined. Advanced. Quietly astonishing. South Korea commands attention. Dynamic. Ambitious. Visibly rising. And then there is Malaysia. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation. Acknowledged but rarely studied. Admired in passing but never placed at the center. I spent time in all 4 countries. I went in with assumptions shaped by rankings, by media, by the quiet authority that certain nations have spent decades building. And when I left, the country that stayed with me wasn't the one I expected. It was Malaysia. Not because it was the loudest. Not because it performed the hardest. But because it did something none of the others managed to do as cleanly. It simply worked. Across almost every dimension that actually shapes a life. To understand why Malaysia is so consistently underestimated, you have to understand how global perception of nations actually forms. It is rarely built on lived experience. It is built on signal strength. Singapore has signal strength. Its GDP, its airport, its skyline, its global financial ranking. These are figures that travel. They attach to a name and stay there. When someone hears Singapore, they already carry a mental image calibrated by decades of repeated data. Japan has signal strength of a different kind. Its cultural exports, cinema, technology, cuisine, aesthetic precision, have built an emotional brand that needs no explanation. The world has already decided how it feels about Japan. South Korea's rise was fast enough to be narrated in real time. The K-wave gave the country a global platform that translated directly into perception. People who have never been to Seoul feel they understand something true about it. Malaysia has operated largely outside all of these mechanisms. It has not built a dominant cultural export. It has not produced a singular global brand moment. Its economic achievements tend to be absorbed into the broader category of Southeast Asian growth without being assigned specifically to Malaysia. This is a visibility problem, not a reality problem. And what fills the space when visibility is low is assumption. The brain reaches for the nearest available category. Muslim majority, a set of associations is applied. Southeast Asia, another set. Not Singapore, not Japan, therefore a tier below. None of this is accurate. But it is how perception operates when the facts have not been made loud enough to compete. The countries that tend to be most overestimated globally are those that have learned to package themselves well. The countries most underestimated are those that invested in function rather than image. Malaysia falls firmly into the second category. Spend time in Singapore, Japan, and South Korea, and you absorb a very specific impression of what modernity looks like. Immaculate. Controlled. Precise. You leave with the feeling of having witnessed something close to a perfected system. Then you arrive in Kuala Lumpur, and the first thing you notice is that it does not try to replicate that impression. The city is layered. Old shophouses sit alongside glass towers. Street-level life is dense and informal. The pace is different. Not slower in the sense of inefficiency, but slower in the sense of existing at a human scale. And then you start to actually use the city. The rail network is extensive, integrated, and substantially cheaper than what commuters pay in Tokyo or Seoul. Stations are clean and air-conditioned. The system functions not as an exception, but as a daily standard. The airport moves international passengers through with a smoothness that many more celebrated airports cannot match. Cashless payment infrastructure reaches from luxury retail to roadside food stalls without friction. These are not things you expect to notice, because you arrived prepared to be patient with them. That gap between expectation and reality is where Malaysia's story actually lives. Healthcare operates at a level that surprises most visitors. Public hospitals are functional and affordable. Private hospitals, with internationally trained staff and modern equipment, are accessible at costs that would be considered exceptional value in any developed economy. Medical tourism to Malaysia is a growing industry built on genuine institutional credibility. Food is a dimension on its own. Kuala Lumpur is one of the most genuinely diverse culinary cities in Asia. Malay, Chinese, Indian, Nyonya, and dozens of regional variations, all operating at price points that remain dramatically below what comparable quality costs in the cities typically held as regional benchmarks. Housing remains within reach in ways that have become structurally impossible in Singapore, Hong Kong, and increasingly in Seoul and Tokyo. The ability to own property, to build stability across a generation, is a form of national wealth that headline rankings do not measure but that shapes everyday reality profoundly. What you find, once the absence of global branding is set aside, is a country with functional infrastructure, a genuinely multicultural social fabric, and a cost of living that preserves quality of life rather than steadily eroding it. That is not a small observation. It is the central one. Singapore is a study in optimization. What it has built is remarkable. But the optimization carries a cost that is rarely measured. An ambient pressure running beneath daily life. The city functions at a level that demands continuous performance from the people inside it. The transaction is real, even when unspoken. Japan produces a sense of order that is genuinely moving. But that same discipline carries weight. The tolerance for variance is narrow. The expectation does not pause. South Korea has compressed decades of development into a pace that produced extraordinary results. But the compression is visible in the people carrying it. The pressure to achieve is not motivational. It is structural. Malaysia operates differently. It has not chased optimization at the expense of everything else. It has not imposed a single cultural mode that everyone must perform. It has not organized itself around output as the primary measure of a life well lived. What Malaysia has maintained, and this becomes visible only after time spent in countries that traded it away, is a functional society that still allows people to exist within it without being consumed by it. The Mamak table at midnight. The neighbor who knows your name. The readiness to include a stranger in a conversation, in a meal, in a moment that was not planned for them. These are not incidental details. They are evidence of a society that has not lost the connective tissue that holds communities together. In Singapore, that kind of contact would be arranged. In Japan, warm but carefully bounded. In South Korea, the pace of life leaves little room for unstructured human connection that serves no immediate purpose. In Malaysia, it happens without architecture. No economic indicator measures that. But every person who lives there eventually notices it. There is a specific psychological pattern that governs how countries with low global visibility are assessed, and Malaysia sits directly inside it. When a country lacks a strong outward narrative, perception defaults to hierarchy by proximity. Malaysia is measured against Singapore, found to be less wealthy and less prominent, and the conclusion drawn is that it must therefore be less significant in every other dimension as well. This logic holds only if you accept that the dimensions Singapore excels in are the correct ones to measure. But what Singapore optimized for is a specific version of modernity. One that prioritized legibility, efficiency, and institutional precision above most other values. The results are impressive. They are also narrow. And what was set aside to achieve them is not invisible to the people who live there. There is also something worth naming about how Malaysians themselves contribute to this misperception. GDP indices measure outputs. They do not measure what is surrendered to produce them. Malaysians are culturally disinclined toward public self-promotion. There is a comfort with understatement, a deflection of pride that reads from the outside as either an absence of confidence or, worse, as tacit confirmation of the outsider's low assessment. When Malaysians joke about their country's dysfunction, they are typically engaging in affectionate self-deprecation that is deeply familiar within the culture. From outside, it can look like agreement. This creates a feedback loop. The country does not promote itself loudly. Locals do not perform national pride visibly. Outsiders interpret both as evidence of diminished standing. The misperception compounds. Meanwhile, the country continues to function quietly. without particular need for the validation it is not receiving. There is an irony in the fact that Malaysia's least visible quality, its self-sufficiency, its indifference to external approval, is precisely what makes it genuinely unusual. Countries organized around maintaining a status tend to perform for the world. Countries organized around functioning tend to simply function. Malaysia is the latter. And the latter, it turns out, produces a more livable environment than the former. After traveling through countries the world holds up as models of what Asia has achieved, the one that left the most lasting impression was the one that had made the least effort to be impressive. That is not a minor observation. It suggests something about the gap between a country's global image and the actual quality of life it provides. And about how consistently we mistake visibility for value. Singapore, Japan, and South Korea have each built something genuinely remarkable. Their achievements are not in question. But achievement always involves a selection. What was chosen? What was optimized? And what was set aside? Malaysia made a different selection. Less legible to the outside world. Less easily ranked. But not, by the measure of the people living inside it, lesser. The question worth sitting with is not whether Malaysia belongs in the same conversation as the countries the world tends to celebrate. It is why the world remains so comfortable having that conversation without it. Where does Malaysia sit in your understanding of Asia, and did anything in this video shift that? Drop it in the comments.